Hello and welcome to the Profiles in Leadership series. This series offers an unparalleled opportunity to glean insights from top leaders who serve in government, education, industry, and civil society. In each episode, we invite these leaders to reflect on their journey and share skills, core values, and qualities that make them the leaders they are today. Dr. Susan Poser was chosen by the Hofstra University Board of Trustees to serve as the 9th president of the university on December 9, 2020, and assumed office on August 1st, 2021. She previously served as the provost and vice chancellor for academic affairs at the University of Illinois Chicago, the Carnegie Research University. Welcome, Madam President.
Thank you, Daryl. Great to be here.
Well, it's been some time since you have been president. You have delivered the State of the Union for the university, State of the University address. Let's start there and reflect on your journey from day one at Hofstra until today. What are some of your key takeaways?
Well, it's been a very interesting journey. I have spent my whole career before this in big public Research One universities. And so it was a change for me to come to a smaller private school, although Hofstra is not small. We've got about 10,000 students, about 6,000 undergraduate and about 4,000 graduate and professional. So at the beginning of my journey here, starting in August 2021, a lot of it was just observing and getting used to a different culture, a different size of a place. The reason that I came here and what I indeed found was a wonderful university with a great community, very dedicated faculty, very dedicated to teaching. But with a whole lot more potential to be developed. And so what I have focused on is building the academic programs, strengthening our strong programs. We're going to have to make some decisions about what exactly we want to focus on in the future. I have found, as I said, a really wonderful community and a community that was ready for change. The previous president had been here for 20 years in that position. And I think the community was ready for a new person. And I think the faculty ready to have reinvestment in them and in the academic programs. And so that's one of the things we focused on a lot. And there are others as well.
Let's talk about your formative years. What was most formative for you during those years?
And by my formative years, you mean when I was a child, or?
Take it however you like.
Well, I would say that, in growing up, let's say, prior to going away to college, I had two formative experiences. I mean, one was that starting when I was about 11, I began going to a place called Interlochen, which is the National Music Camp. It's in northern Michigan near Traverse City. And so I was a girl growing up on the Upper West Side of New York City. And suddenly I was in the Midwest. I was wearing a uniform. Everybody had to wear a uniform there. So you couldn't tell who had money, where anybody was from. And everybody was really judged on their talent and on their personalities and their character. And kids came from all over the country and indeed all over the world. And I spent 8 weeks there for 5 summers, starting when I was 11. And it just expanded, having quite apart from the music and the drama that I studied, it expanded my understanding of this country, my understanding of the very different kinds of people, my respect for the arts and for the many people there who were really pre-professional, which I never was. And so that was a very formative experience. And, my best friend is still from there. And then she was from Chicago and she now lives in Norway. But that was really where I felt I grew up, in some ways even more than in New York. And I would say the second thing is, less positive. My parents got divorced when I was 13. And so I actually grew up very quickly after that. And it changed a lot of how I saw the world and myself and so on. Um, but I got through it, and it's, so yeah, I'll stop
What
there.
advice would you give to your younger self, knowing what you know now?
Advice, I guess I would say, trust your judgment, trust your observations of people and events. I would say join things. I don't feel that I joined enough things in high school, the newspaper or the student government or whatever. I have a daughter who's a real joiner, and it's brought her lots of joy, and has helped her develop really beautifully.
Did you nudge her?
No, I did not nudge her. It was just herself.
Let's talk about mentors and mentees. For viewers watching this that have not seen the inauguration of President Posa, I recommend it. It is a wonderful celebration of what a leader should be like, and the support and really partnership that one gets over the years because of who one is. So the first person that came to the podium to talk about you was Daniel Dawes, and he described you as a light, and this imagery of a light came about a lot in his remarks about you. Reflect on that and tell us about your relationship with Daniel and how that came to be.
Well, the first thing I'll say is that I didn't know what he was going to say until I think the morning, or maybe the morning before that event. And I was like, Daniel, this is just way over the top. So I just want that for the record. So Daniel came to the law school where I was then teaching at the University of Nebraska. He came from Florida. And he was part of a summer program, actually, for underrepresented students going to law school. He went through that program and then decided he wanted to come to Nebraska. And he was just somebody who always sat in the front of the class. I think I had 3 classes with him and taught him. And he was just genuinely interested in what was going on. He was very friendly. He made lots of friends there. He was a leader of the students. And he, as a faculty member, you can't go to the students and say, do you want to be mentored, or, do you want to talk to me? They have to come to you. It's just kind of how it works. And so he came to me, and just to talk about whatever the classes were, to talk about his career later on. And so I just got to know him very well. And then he followed up, and I followed up, and eventually I was the dean of the law school, and he was one of our, really becoming a very prominent alumni in his study of healthcare and healthcare policy. He has published several books at this point. And so I just sort of stayed in touch with him, and supported him in any way that I could. And it kind of goes back to the joining thing. I mean, if talking to young people, what young people have to understand is that people like me, we're in this business because we want to support them, but they have to ask for it. They have to come and start the conversation. We can't always start the conversation. And if you do that, you can build really great relationships and have a lot of mentors. And I have several people that I know that I have that kind of relationship with, who are actually now just my colleagues out there in higher education in one way or another.
In a previous interview, you talked about the importance of following through. And Daniel also mentioned how you followed through in your relationship with him. Of course, now you're giving him credit for following through in his relationship with you too. What is the secret sauce, if you like, of keeping up a relationship like this over the years?
Well, I mean, I think it's exactly that. I think it's keeping up, and that means it's paying attention. And, these days, Some of that is, I mean, this sounds silly, but some of it is liking what they put on LinkedIn and sending them things when you see something, oh, well, maybe Daniel would be interested in this. Supporting their work and amplifying their work when you see it, publishes a new book, getting it out on the ways that I can get it out on social media. But it's also, personal relationships on the telephone. And, he used to call me for advice on various things. And again, I wouldn't in any way tell him what to do, but just try to talk through issues with him. And it brings me great joy. It comes back, I think, even to a greater amount than what I give. And I think most mentors feel that way.
And you were also on the receiving end of mentorship. Another person was there on the podium who spoke glowingly about you, Harvey Perlman. How did that relationship start, and describe that mentor-mentee relationship that you have with Harvey Perlman? And who Harvey Perlman is.
Who Harvey Perlman is. So Harvey Perlman was initially a very distinguished law faculty member at Nebraska. He was then the dean at Nebraska College of Law for about 15 years, I believe, for a long time. And then shortly after he stepped down from that, he became the chancellor of the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and oversaw the whole campus of about, I think at that time, maybe 24,000 students. I met him over the phone in 1993 when my husband actually got a job at the University of Nebraska in the chemistry department, and they had basically a sort of spousal hire policy. I was writing a dissertation. I had a law degree. I had clerked for a judge. And anyway, he got asked to hire me for a year when I came out there. So that's how I met him. Eventually, though, he was looking for a chief of staff as the chancellor. And by that time, I was a tenured faculty member at the law school. And so I applied for that job, even though I really didn't know anything about it. But I was starting to think that maybe, although I loved teaching and I loved writing law review articles, I wasn't sure I wanted to do it for the rest of my life. And I had I sort of had an inkling that I might be interested in administration and higher ed. And so I got that job and worked very closely with him from 2007 to 2010. That mentoring, though, was very different than the sort of relationship I have with Daniel Dawes, in the sense that Harvey is a person. He was a great leader at Nebraska, a person of incredible integrity, very direct, very honest. And but even though I was, among his closest advisors and worked with him very closely, we didn't have sort of typical, like, oh, can you give me advice, mentoring types of relationship most of the time. The mentoring that I got from him, and I think I said this at the inauguration, was through observation. I watched very carefully what he did, how he ran meetings, how he reacted to people. I saw him in meetings with, our athletic director or our provost or even the president of the whole Nebraska system. And I just stored those things away and thought about them. And, either said, oh, gosh, if I ever ended up like in these positions, I would do that, or I would not do that. But it was really through observation of somebody who I just admired and had a lot of respect for. But I feel that I was very mentored by him. And I think he considers himself a mentor, but it wasn't through, sort of meeting him once a week to have mentoring sessions or anything like that.
They say that life at the top can be lonely, and few people really understand the pressures that a president feels or a vice chancellor feels. But one such person that was on that stage that day too talked about the kinship that you had with her, both as a friend and as a partner, professional partner in what you were doing, Barbara Wilson. So tell us about that relationship and how that was important for you as a leader.
So I got to know Barbara Wilson when I was the provost at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And she was the vice president for academic affairs of the whole University of Illinois system. So the system oversees the campus at Urbana-Champaign, the campus at Chicago, and the campus in Springfield. And so there's a system office. And so she was kind of like the provost of the system in a way. And she was, so she had a very important job, and she worked with some very interesting people. And again, with her, and particularly during COVID, where she met with the three provosts of these three campuses, of which I was one, I think we met, I don't know, maybe once a week or every other week, just to go through all the issues, that we were dealing with. And of course, this was all on Zoom. And again, I watched her run meetings. I watched her deal with, the various issues that came up. I watched her in her relationship with the president that she was working for. But with her, unlike, with Harvey, I also spoke to her a lot on the side, and we shared our experiences as women in, these sort of hierarchies. And she did provide me with a lot of advice with things that I was dealing with on my campus. And so with her, I would say that it's definitely a mentor relationship, but also a real friendship that we developed and that I really treasure. She left around the time I left to become the president of the University of Iowa. And is doing a wonderful job in that position. And I do talk to her on the phone every now and then, and we just kind of share notes and experiences and so on.
Do personal friendships and partnerships become institutional friendships and partnerships? Do you see yourself doing more between Hofstra and Iowa, because the person who is guiding that ship?
Well, I mean, we don't have anything right now, and we're very, very different kinds of institutions, right? One big public, state school and a private, smaller school on Long Island. I think it's possible. I do firmly believe that relationships are the most important thing in growing your professional network and finding opportunities. There are many things that matter, but relationships are very, very important. And I know that if I called her up, if I needed something, or whether it was advice, or I was looking for a particular kind of person to hire, or whatever it was, and I called her up, she would help me in any way that she could. And of course, vice versa as well. And so that is just, that's invaluable in these jobs. In particular, because they are lonely jobs, and there are many things that I think about and I wonder about and I have questions about, but they're not things that I can speak to anybody at my campus about necessarily, because it's just a different relationship when everybody reports to you.
Is there a president's club where people who are in your position can come together and exchange notes, but on a bigger scale than a one-to-one friendship partnership type?
Well, it's a good question, because I was meeting with the don't know her exact title, but I think she's like a senior vice president of the EAB, the Educational Advisory Board, which is a higher ed consulting group that does a lot of really great research, and they work with campuses all over the country. And her name's Sally Amoruso. And we in this, it was just a friendly meeting because she was on campus, but we brainstormed a women's president group of just what you're describing, Daryl, and then started it. And it has met now twice, again, on Zoom. We're going to try to meet in person, probably in DC at some point. And basically every woman president she could think of, or any of us could think of, is invited. And we've only really had 2 meetings, but we sort of pick a topic and just have a very open discussion about it. And it's really been terrific. So that's up and going. I don't know about other national ones. I know that, for example, the presidents of the AAU get together. I think that the Big Ten presidents get together. I'm sure the SEC presidents get together. So there are other groupings, but this was one for women presidents, anywhere at colleges and universities in the United States.
What a wonderful idea. See, you make things happen.
Well,
Uh,
it was, I couldn't have done it myself. And so it was great to have her as a partner, and she's really organized the whole thing. I haven't done very much about it, but we brainstormed it together, definitely.
So Barbara Wilson talked about two other things about you, which I want to touch on. The first actually has to do with mentorship as well, and this is institutional mentorship. She talked about how you created a pathway for uh, underrepresented graduate students to become faculty members, as well as faculty members to become administrators. So tell us about both of these initiatives.
So they are separate initiatives. The first one we call the Bridge to the Faculty. And this was an attempt, and this was at the University of Illinois, Chicago, to further diversify our faculty. It's something I'm very focused on here as well at Hofstra. What we did was we hired, again, for the most part, underrepresented postgraduate students who were looking for postdocs. And we then, and we basically just said to the departments, if you can find somebody, we will fund them to come on as a postdoc. And you can make an arrangement with them that if they, hit certain markers, it might be, one publication, it might be finishing up some project. For some of them, it was finishing their dissertation and then successfully having a year or two of postdoc. I think we set it at 2 years. Then we will provide the pathway right into an assistant professor. This program had been around only for, I think, maybe a year and a half when I left. So, but I can say that during that time, it was very successful. And the idea behind it is that if they came in and they found community and they were happy there, they would be, very happy to just become a faculty member. And then, we wouldn't be competing for them in the way that we would be if they were just sort of out on the market. Of course, they were not tied down. If they wanted to go out on the market, there was no deal that, they had to pay us back or anything if they decided to go be a faculty member somewhere else. But during the time that I was there, it was very successful in retaining them. And had an effect on the diversity of our faculty, which was particularly important at UIC, where there was no ethnic or racial majority among the undergraduate student body. And in fact, when I left, it was it was all minority numbers, but actually the Latinx students had a higher percentage of the undergraduate population than the white kids. And so it was just very important. I feel the same way here, where we're quite diverse at Hofstra. Very important to have your faculty look as close to your student body as possible, so that they see mentors and that they see people who can say, hey, that person, I recognize that person. Maybe I can be a faculty member sometime, or maybe I can get a PhD sometime. So that was one of them. The other one was something called the Faculty Administrator Leadership Program, which, Daryl, you participated in. Unfortunately, got a little bit interrupted by COVID. And this too actually started out as a faculty diversity attempt. And, what I heard when I got to UIC was that we didn't have a good pipeline of administrators at the university, and that we needed to diversify the senior administration, the vice chancellors and the deans. And so we set up this program to basically provide mentorship to interested faculty. And we said that we would give some preference to tenured faculty who were from underrepresented groups, but it was a large enough cohort. We didn't have to leave anybody out. I figured that in the first year of this, and well, let me say how we set it up. We just put out a call and we said, you will get a mentor who is either at the dean level or the vice chancellor level. You will meet with them. You can have lunch with them or whatever once a month. That you would have to do 2 shadowing or interviewing experiences. So you'd have to ask somebody if you could shadow them for a day. I had many people shadow me in this program. And then each person in this program would have to find an administrative issue that they thought was, a barrier to success or a problem or something like that. And they would have to sort of research it a little bit and come up with some kind of solution. And then we shared those solutions at the end of the year of their participation in the program. And then the last thing was that I took them all to the national meeting, the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities meeting. And for most people, it was the first meeting, higher ed meeting they'd been to that was not in the discipline, right? So the biologists were going to biology, you know, and the law faculty are going to the ALS, the kind of law faculty meetings. But this was the one for higher ed administrators. And I took them, and they would be running around these meetings, and people would be wondering why there were all these faculty there with these UIC pins on them. But the faculty found them fascinating because they're just a very different kind of meeting and different discussions. So we started this program, and I thought maybe I'd have 5 people, you know, apply. And we had something like 28. And so we could only pick 14 that first year. We just didn't have the capacity for it. Anyway, it was just a huge success. And I think it really did help to bridge the divide between the faculty and administrators, because the faculty learn something about what our jobs are. I think they're very mysterious. You know, people like me, I know what faculty do. I have huge respect for it, but it doesn't go the other way unless you actually let them in. And we had some wonderful projects. I mean, there were some that really came to fruition. One I remember is that someone from social work was in a cohort, and she said, well, we need a associate dean for research and social work. We don't have one. So she researched it, and anyway, she came up with a great proposal and eventually persuaded the dean to create this. And then I think she actually occupied that. Here's the downside, if I may say one more thing on this. That is that a lot of the people in this program found it so fulfilling that they then wanted to go into administration. We didn't necessarily have all the jobs for them. And we started to lose faculty. They went and took chair positions at different universities. And interestingly, we lost a lot of women faculty, which was not a good thing. And I remember another vice chancellor coming up to me and saying, you've got to stop your program because we're losing too many good people. And I was like, well, why don't we just hire them? Why don't we fill our chair positions with them? That was the point. So anyway, I didn't stop the program, but I don't know that it's still going on without me there. I don't know what's happened to it.
Well, institutionalizing success, I think, is an important part of it too, but there's only so much you can do, I think, when you're not there. And
Right.
whoever is occupying the position has to find it in himself to carry it on.
That's
right. If they don't, it's all the poorer, because it was certainly one of the highlights of my time at UIC. And if I might say so, this very podcast series was inspired by the experiences that I had with you, Susan. And when you use the word mysterious, I think that's an exactly apt word, because sometimes leadership, especially administrative leadership, is very mysterious. And unless you actually get people to reflect on that journey, it's all bottled up and you don't know what's happening right at the top. But also you talk about the disruption, and the disruption was actually a blessing in disguise, because FELP was meant to be a one-year program. We didn't get to go to the big conference that you mentioned, but I thought that we had more than made up for it by having it extended, but both by another year. And in doing so, I had a second mentor in addition to my first. And thank you for agreeing to be that mentor. I still remember that last session that you had with us, where you talked about how, as a leader, as a provost, and as a president that designate, you would embody the institution. And that was an insight that has remained with me since. Yeah. I'm going to digress for a moment and ask you, how does embodying Hofstra look like for you?
Well, I mean, the thing is, you just have to remember that you are always seen as the president of, I mean, for me, you know, as the president of Hofstra in your role. And so it is everything from, you know, how I go out on a Saturday morning to go get a cup of coffee, you know, to, you know, how I talk about what I'm doing and to whom. I don't know, it's really just something that has to be in your brain all the time. And I have funny stories about this from Nebraska, where realized this even as the dean of the law school, that I was very public. And part of that is it wasn't a big town. And so you saw people you knew all the time. And I was once at the grocery store on a Saturday morning, just doing my thing and, t-shirts and a t-shirt and jeans. And I probably hadn't even taken a shower. And I'm waiting, packing my groceries. And someone says, "Oh, Susan." And I turn around and it's one of the justices of the Nebraska Supreme Court, who I knew because I was the dean of the law school. And I looked terrible. And he was in his sort of Saturday ironed shirt and ironed khakis. And, he was also shopping at the same store, but he looked like, nice Saturday morning leisure wear. And I was absolutely mortified. I truthfully put my groceries in the car, and I drove across the street to this mall, and I went into, I think it was the Loft or something, and bought myself weekend clothing that I just couldn't go out. I realized I can't go out like this. And so when you're president of a university, it's kind of, that, increased exponentially, although Long Island is a bigger place and I'm not recognized. Most of the places I go, I don't think.
So do you dress like this in the grocery store now?
I certainly don't. I don't dress in my, quite like you're seeing me right now on the Zoom, but I certainly don't go out ever looking like kind of a slob. And so, and I was the mother of a couple kids, I was a busy person, and I just didn't think about going to the grocery store, what I was wearing. And I realized that I had to at that moment. That's why Chicago was nice, because I was quite anonymous in Chicago.
I agree.
Not so much on Long Island. But anyway, but it's not, obviously it's not just the clothing. It's also just, trying to remain upbeat, and when I meet people, and being ready to talk about Hofstra if they ask me, and also learning about Long Island, learning about the community that I'm in, having nothing to do with the university necessarily, and becoming a citizen of the community. But again, it's never really in my own right. It's always sort of as a representative of Hofstra, because that's how everybody sees me.
And part of the community is the political leadership. And I remember there was a post about you meeting Chuck Schumer.
Yes, sure.
And, what type of relationship does the university have with political leadership of the state, and why is that important?
Well, it's very important. And I am, in the process of developing those relationships, not only, with the senators who I see less often. I've met them both several times, Chuck Schumer and Kristen Gillibrand, and the House members, but also in state government. And, a lot of people, I certainly didn't realize this coming from, public higher education, but the state, and I'm sure this is true in other states too, actually have a lot of resources for private schools, grants and that kind of thing. And so we apply from and get grants from the state. So we have lobbying that we do. We also have lobbying on other issues, things that are happening in our community, or, public policy that we want to influence. So it's very, very important to have those relationships. At some level, more important at the state level, because that affects us more. But the federal level, of course, is also very important. But there's also a lot of local politics in Long Island. So we're part of the county of Nassau County. We're also part of the town of Hempstead. We are part of the village of Hempstead and the village of Uniondale. So there are many, many levels. It's a very complex political environment on Long Island, which I am still learning. And I have somebody that I just hired somebody to really just do that, because it's a big job.
I want to talk about Susan Poser, the visionary, because that's how Barbara Wilson described you. And she talked about how you identified a problem and you overcome challenges, and you made what many people thought was impossible happen. And she was referring, of course, to the John Marshall Law School. So reflect on that experience and what leadership meant for you during that process.
So this was something, and what you're referring to is the University of Illinois Chicago, basically acquiring, merging with, however you want to say it, the John Marshall Law School, which was a very long-standing, very well-known, renowned law school, private law school in Chicago. Had been around for what, 120 years or something.
Since 1899.
1899. And it was very well known for its night school. It had the only Chicago school with a night school at one time. And so a lot of people were educated there, you know, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, who were doing some other job, whether they were police officers or business people or whatever, and then went in the evening to law school. So it was a real sort of anchor in Chicago. And Chicago had 6 law schools, all of which were private. And so this idea of, there was a kind of missing piece, that UIC had an enormous health sciences section with like 7 health sciences colleges, and then, you know, engineering and arts and sciences and the arts and so on. We did not have a law school. And so the chancellor, when he came in, wanted to try this again. It had been tried, I think, back in around 1990, and for political reasons, it didn't work. So he brought together some members of the board of trustees of John Marshall, and we had a conversation. And then he basically handed it to me and said, you know, can you get this done? And, you know, I have reflected on that a lot. And you know, it was a huge logistical job. But the first thing we had to do was persuade, first of all, the board and really the faculty at John Marshall that this would be a good thing to do. Then we had to persuade our own faculty that this would be a good thing to do, which really translated into, we're not going to take your money and spend it, you know, on the law faculty, that this is going to be a growth of the pie. It's not going to be a shift in resources. We're not, you know, and that you need to understand that having a law school creates so many opportunities for interdisciplinary work and research and so on. And of course, I had experience with that, having been a dean of a law school. So that was sort of the first, I don't know, 6 months or something or more of this project. And I would say, though, that the reason that it was able to get done is that we built trust with the board of John Marshall. And they were very protective of the school. And yet they also understood that in the current, you know, economic environment, the law school environment, that standalone private law schools were at something of a disadvantage and at something of an economic risk, not John Marshall in particular, but just that to be part of a larger entity was just safer. And they kind of knew this instinctually. We talked about that a lot, but they also had to trust us that we were not just going to sort of acquire this law school, which had a great location right downtown. We weren't going to acquire it and then end it and take their buildings and, you know, move our College of Medicine there or something like that. And it was something that from their point of view was reasonable for them to think, because one could do that. But of course, from our point of view, it wasn't our intention at all. And we had to bridge that gap. And there were various ways in which we did that. Initially, we structured the deal so that we wouldn't even get the property outright for 5 years or something. Eventually, we built up so much trust with them that they just gave it to us at the time of the signing of the deal. And so that kind of is an indication of that. And it's hard to explain exactly how that was done. It was a lot of meetings, a lot of conversation, a lot of them seeing us talk to their faculty and then, you know, seeing how we dealt with our faculty. And then I would say, you know, logistically, the thing that got this done was that I hired a fabulous project manager. And it taught me what project management was, really. Because we had to have, I think we had 12 committees. I used to say that made it sort of biblical. You know, you had to have a committee looking at payroll, at alumni, at all the IT things, bringing their systems into our systems. And so the whole thing took a few years. And then the other thing that I think Barb did talk about was persuading the board of the University of Illinois. And we did that through basically a year of a series of presentations both on the sort of vision side of what we wanted to do with the law school and why we thought this was a good idea, but also on the logistical side of how we would deal with the budgets and how it would not affect other aspects of UIC and so on. So it was a tremendously complicated thing. We were all kept in line by this project manager. But again, it came down to relationships in a lot of ways. We created trust with their board, and we created trust with our board, the University of Illinois board, such that they were persuaded that this would be a success.
Which group of stakeholders would you say, on hindsight, or perhaps even then, was the most challenging to deal with?
I think actually the University of Illinois board. And I think that was because, the University of Illinois at the time had one law school, and it was the University of Illinois College of Law in Urbana-Champaign, which is a very highly ranked law school. I don't know where they are now, but they've been in the top probably 20, 25. And, there was a fear that we would somehow siphon students from them because we were going to be in the city. They're out, really in the countryside in Urbana-Champaign, 2 hours south of Chicago. And so I think that, and the board was, heavily kind of geared towards Urbana-Champaign. It's the flagship, it's the Big Ten school, and so on. And so we had to create a plan that would not in any way threaten them. And I think we did that by focusing on public service, public interest, focusing on the connection the law school would have with the healthcare sciences that we had at UIC, and on interdisciplinary work, very particular interdisciplinary work with our, particularly with engineering and in sort of IT patent type of stuff. And these weren't things that I think would threaten what was going on at Urbana-Champaign. So again, we just had to be very thoughtful and strategic about it. Yeah, so
Yeah,
I could go on and on.
Yeah. What was the role of the dean at that time in shepherding this through or partnering with you in the process?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story too, because at the time that we just barely started these conversations, the current dean was stepping down, a longtime dean at John Marshall. So they started a search, and I said, they had already started a search, I think. And I said to them, look, why don't you stop the search, put in an interim, and that way, when the school is, part of UIC, we can sort of start fresh and hire somebody into UIC rather than make that person kind of start here and move over. And they said, no, we have somebody we really like, and I really want to hire this person. I'm like, I just don't think this is a good idea, but anyway, tell me who it is. So they told me it was Darby Dickerson, who I knew, and I said, okay, I'm wrong, hire Darby Dickerson. So she was great, and so we were very clear with her when she came in that this project was sort of getting moving, and that this could happen, and that we would want her support. And she was, she was all in, and she took that risk. And I think she spent a lot of time talking to the faculty. You would know that better than I, Daryl, because you were there. And I worked with her very, very closely in figuring out some of the logistical things, although we had sort of committees all over the place dealing with that. She dealt with, in some ways, more of that than I did, but also in thinking about the cultural connection and how we were going to bring them together. And, one of the things is, I came several times and talked to the faculty and took questions, and we got faculty up to UIC to show them what was going on. We put faculty from UIC and the law school together so that they could see all the opportunities that were there. We created a committee that was just looking at academic opportunities that would come about through this. So she was an absolute critical partner with this, and I don't think we could have gotten it done without her, not just her dedication to it, but her incredible hard work on it.
Thank you. Now, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about leadership qualities. During an interview you gave, you highlighted 3 of them: listening well, trusting and delegating, and being a little fearless. So reflect on each of these and what they meant to you.
All right, what was the first one?
Listening well.
Listening well. Well, I mean, I think that's true in all aspects of life, right? You can't learn anything if you're talking all the time, as I am doing here, actually. But so a good example is just coming to Hofstra. Again, I was coming from the big public school culture into a private school in New York on Long Island, just a very different environment. And I knew very well that I couldn't know exactly what I wanted to do here until I understood the place. And I did, of course, a lot of research during the transition between the time I was appointed and the time I actually started. But there's nothing like being on the ground and talking to people to get the culture. And so I just don't think you can function. And I think people who come into these kinds of jobs and say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. And, you're with me or you're against me. That doesn't work. And I've seen that not work many times. Because every institution has its own culture and and the people have their own priorities and their own goals. And you've got to learn all that in order to have mutual understanding so that, when you decide the things you want to do, that you have the buy-in and that you have the goodwill to bring people along. So, but I would say that that's true in friendships and child rearing and everything else, listening. So the second one you said was...
you have to trust the people that you're working with, is what you said.
Yeah. And I think that that's part of the listening. In other words, once you decide, that this is somebody that they know what they're doing, I think they have in this case, the best interests of the university in mind. I see the kind of work they've done in the past. I see how they communicate it. My attitude is, if I wanted to be the head of enrollment management or development, or if I wanted to be the athletic director, I would have applied for that job, right? It's not the job I have. And so what I tell people is that I do not micromanage. I don't want to do their jobs. I'm not an expert at their jobs. But I do like information. I like to understand what's going on, in part because it helps me know more about, what's going on at the university, in part because when I get asked a question, I can say, yes, this is what's happening in this area. And in part because if they come to me and tell me something that I really don't think is right, we can deal with it then, rather than finding out later, maybe when something has gone to such a length that it becomes more of a problem.
Let me ask you just a quick follow-up to that. How do you create that safe space so that the people that report to you feel like they can come to you and share, if you like, how they messed up, so that you can fix it?
Well, another thing that I always say to people when I, who I work with is that, and this is something that I learned directly from Harvey Perlman, actually, in a little incident that happened. And it wasn't about me, but he said it to me about someone else, that when I stop making mistakes, I'm going to demand that everybody who works for me stops making mistakes. But that time is a very long way off and will never happen, right? So we all make mistakes. And the most important thing is that obviously it's not something you did that, was sort of done with a bad motive or something. I say, tell me what it was, tell me how you're fixing it, and let's move on. And if I see it as something that's somehow a larger problem than just a mistake, then I got to deal with that, right? But if it is somebody that I have come to trust and then we'll move along after it gets sort of addressed. And maybe I can help them address it because I've been doing this for so long that, by coming to me, maybe that will help them address it. And that tends to break the ice pretty well, because a lot of people, especially with a new person coming in, is afraid, oh God, if I screw up, she's going to fire me. I don't know what this person is, right? So if you can sort of break the ice and say, we're in this together and I want to work with you, and I want you to work with me to make this place better or accomplish whatever we're going to accomplish, I think it it helps people to be more open about those things.
And how do you help people and yourself be fearless? Because that's the third thing that you talked about.
Well, I think that there's a lot of irrational fear that people generally have. Again, it's not just in these jobs, about sort of doing something different or saying something you really believe that you haven't heard anyone else say. And I often say to myself, like, well, if I say this, or if I suggest we go and do this new thing, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You know, so it starts out with just as an idea, like, why not just say, hey, what if we try to do this? You know, or saying something that's on my mind. If you really stop beforehand and say, what's going to happen if I say this? Most of the time, it's like, well, nothing. Like, people will either say, that's a really stupid idea, Susan, or they'll say, oh, well, that's interesting. Let's talk that through. And I have been in situations, and I had a very good group when I was the dean at the University of Nebraska, and we were all lawyers because, you know, lawyers tend to go. So my associate dean obviously, you know, was a law professor, but my head of admissions had gone to the law school, and my alumni person had gone to the law school, and my career services person had gone to the law school. So we would sit around and we were a bunch of lawyers. And the nice thing about that was that lawyers know that you can argue and it's not personal, right? That's how you're trained, right? And so I had a great relationship with them, and they did sometimes say to me, really stupid idea, don't do it. And there was one instance when I did do something anyway, because I thought I was right and they were wrong, and it turned out they were right. And it was a very small thing. It was just a sort of joke I was making at an alumni gathering, but it felt like a, you know, like a lead ball or something, and they were right. And I should have listened to them. But I had a relationship with them where they could say that to me. And a lot of times they said it to me and I said, okay, I won't do it. You're right. But that's just sort of developed over time through conversations where you show them that you're supporting them and you want them to succeed, and maybe have given them some decent advice already, or at least batted stuff around. And it just builds on itself. It's just trust.
Thank you. Do you feel that today that the value of a college education is in doubt? You read about how the president wants to really level the playing field, and a lot of tech companies were already saying for many years that the college education is not necessary. So how do you, as president of Institute of Higher Learning, see this challenge?
Well, I think higher education is very important, and for many, many people is transformational in their lives, because they just get to a different level of inquiry and reading and thinking and writing than they can possibly have in high school. And that what it teaches you in the best possible situation is to be able to look at issues and problems and analyze them and think of the pros and cons and communicate how you feel about things and listen and consider how other people do that. And that's really what a liberal arts education is all about. We were just talking about this yesterday. We had Howard Gardner here and Wendy Fishman talking about their new book, and which is a very interesting and provocative book called What's College For? Or no, The Real World of College is what it's called. But anyway, and I believe in that. And I think that those qualities of mind are critical no matter what you're going to do in your life. It doesn't matter, because you're always going to have problems. You're always going to have to problem solve. You're always going to have to communicate and read and understand what you're reading and so on. I think that higher education has done a terrible job of communicating that. And that's a sort of global problem in higher ed right now, because so many students, but also their parents, come in and all they're really interested in, or appear to be interested in, is, you know, what job is my kid, or what job am I going to get when I get out? And of course, we all know that the first job you get is sort of irrelevant, and that most people are going to have many jobs. And most importantly, many of the jobs that they're going to have, like the students we have right now, we don't even know what they are. And one example that my enrollment manager talks about sometimes is, when I was in school, nobody could have trained me to work in social media. Like, that didn't exist, right? And computers were barely existing. Certainly iPhones, having a computer in your back pocket didn't exist. And so it's a state of mind that, an ability to adapt and to think about new things that we're teaching, really. And that's absolutely critically important for citizens, for citizenship, never mind for a career. But we've not done a good job of responding to the kinds of criticisms that higher ed has gotten. Higher ed certainly deserves some criticisms, absolutely. But
And whose job is it then to respond to these criticisms that students shouldn't be taking all these debt, that even when they graduate, they're creating inequity because the wage differential between a college graduate and a vocational graduate is so much, and that just exacerbates the state of the world that we see today.
Well, I mean, one explanation for that no one wants to talk about is that public support of higher education has just fallen tremendously, right? I mean, there are schools, I think, like the University of Colorado, which is like 3% or something like that, state supported, right? University of Illinois was higher than that, but it used to be that higher ed was considered a public good, and that our tax money went to, in part, supporting the education of the citizenry, of the society. And now higher ed is really thought of a lot in a lot of circles as a private good, right? It's for me to learn, for me to go get a job. And that's a cultural shift. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that more people are going into higher ed now. It's more expensive, right? We have all kinds of other things that our state legislatures are worried about, Medicare and Medicaid and K-12 education and public safety and on and on and on. But so that's one of the foundational reasons for the cost of higher ed right now. So it's a good question, and it's a public policy issue in many ways. At a private school, you become, I mean, you fundraise for scholarships and try to get grants and so on. But as at a public school, private schools are the same in the sense that the vast majority of what you're spending money on is people, right? 70 to 80% of the budget is people, it's payroll, and that goes up every year. So it's very hard to unwind that and stay afloat. And I say that for public and private. When I came here, I was told, well, now you're going to have to start worrying about enrollment because you're at a private school. But I've spent my whole career worrying about enrollment at big public schools, right? Because the tuition pays for a lot because of the decline in state subsidy. It's very complicated, very, very complicated. And I think to the question of whose job is it to, at least to explain the value of higher ed, I think it's my job personally when I speak to alumni, when I speak to parents. I think it's collectively the job of those of us who are in higher ed, from the presidents to the faculty to the staff and so on. And I think really it should be the governments too, because the United States has been the envy of the world in terms of their higher education, and people have come here from around the world to get educated because of our sort of academic freedom and free inquiry, which isn't true everywhere, and because there's access. We don't weed, we don't sort of weed everybody out in high school. But we're at risk of losing that if we don't do something about it.
That's huge. We are on the hour, and out of respect to your time, I do have one more question.
Yes.
Do you have time for one more question?
Yes, I do. I think. Yes, go ahead.
What is your plan between now and your next state of the university address? What should people be looking out for from Dr. Susan Poser?
Well, we are doing strategic planning in a kind of interesting way. We are going to the faculty with RFPs to have them propose interesting new academic programs with an emphasis on interdisciplinary programs, an emphasis on thinking about how to strengthen the first year curriculum. And so we are awaiting those proposals, and those are going to help us see what the faculty are interested in, where their initiative is in terms of building our programs here and strengthening our reputation and so on. And so hopefully by next, I think it's mid-September, something like that, my state of the university will be talking about the new faculty we're hiring to support these proposals and the proposals that we are supporting and funding, and what what our hopes and dreams are for what they're going to do at Hofstra. So that's one of the things. We have, again, also a big effort to diversify our faculty, and I'm hoping to have some progress there by next year. We are hiring deans right now, and so we will have some progress there in the fall. And we have some pretty great athletic teams, so I got my fingers crossed on the basketball championships coming up.
Thank you, Susan. Madam President, President Poser, thank you very much for a great interview.
Thank you, Daryl. I appreciated the opportunity. It was great to see you.
Thank you.